But we do get to have respectful conversations as long as we're bringing our shared humanity to them. I'm probably not going to take a question from Chantelle's mate, to be perfectly honest.
He's a scientist.
What does the definition of misinformation mean? You said it 52 times.
You can go look it up if you want.
Oh.
In response to the Fire and Fury doco, I think you have to check out this video. I mean, when she gets questioned, instead of just blasting what she thinks in front of her camera, and when she actually gets asked the questions, this is what you get.
So nice to meet you. I did enjoy listening to your perspective. I have some questions. Obviously, I'll just do one because I know there's a big audience behind me. I've spent the last year talking to a lot of people, obviously, that were against mandates and asking their perspective and seeing a different perspective to just the government narrative. And it's really interesting, and I have to say there was a deep difference between what the government was saying about people and then their true intentions. And I think, personally for me, when I've met tens of thousands of these people, the number one thing that kept coming back to it is the government keep not giving people information and letting them make up their own minds and giving them accurate information to the widest extent and not allowing different points of view, which then further polarised people. And an example of this is, we have official information acts that show that Jacinda Ardern openly lied to everybody in New Zealand and the media when she said we're not considering vaccine passes, and she'd already been briefed on what the pass would look like. So people see this information, then they see the government lying to them, and obviously that just extends wider questions around, well, what else could they possibly be lying about? And if it's about health, why are we not looking at things like healthier eating? Why are we not lowering GST on these items? Why are we not encouraging people to get outside? These are the types of questions people have, and why are we not talking about treatments, it's just vaccines? I think the whole community has a lot of questions, and rather than answering them, they're told that are stupid or are irrelevant. I know the Māori community, one second, sorry, just about finished. Yeah, so I am concerned that I think we're seeing government propaganda continuously, and it's only following a certain narrative. Do you think that government has done an accurate job of representing all sides of this argument and giving people enough depth and enough studies?
I'm not government, sadly.
You're funded by the government though.
Am I?
Yeah.
Who are you funded by, Chantelle?
Honestly, independent citizens.
So am I. At the moment I'm funded by mainly by my husband, actually, to be perfectly honest.
Who does he work for?
You've got to do what you've got to do. I think the thing that we need to make really clear here is that information disorders run both ways. And one of the things that I would like to make clear to you, and one of the things that it's good for audiences to understand, is that there is a narrative that lots of people may have participated in, which might be the narrative that New Zealand's done really well in the COVID-19 response, might be the narrative focused on uniting against COVID-19 and the government narrative. And that is one narrative that some people have chosen to identify with, and there are other narratives that other people have chosen to identify with. I'm not necessarily here to judge the validity of either of those narratives. I'm here to talk about where people are getting their information from. So I mean, obviously you were one of the information sources.
Yeah, and you did actually get a number of things inaccurate when it came to me as well within your study.
We're just doing questions.
Yeah, no, that's fine, but I'm just clarifying. You were false some information with me, and so therefore what is disinformation? How do you define intent? Because obviously you did have the intent of defaming me, whereas the content that I produce, I do not have the intent. I do not have the intent of causing any harm to anybody.
That's a pretty big claim to make. I'm going to go to a question back.
Thanks.
My name's Dudley. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dudley. Good to see you here.
I wonder if you have any advice for activists. You described how now being an activist puts you at some risk in terms of online response among the far-right Telegram users, using doxing as a technique in potential harm and violence. So I'm wondering if we want to be activists, as Aotearoa showed recently, how do we do that and maintain the safety of ourselves and the people that are important to us?
It's a really difficult question, Dudley, and one that I've had to personally explore in the last 18 months myself as an academic. we have to make choices about which spaces we're happy to go into. This is my first public talk for 18 months since somebody's probably got somebody filming here, which I can't try and find me from my campus office. So, you know, there are real personal security risks, as I know you've personally experienced. But this is really important. There is a thing, you know, as I've talked about, there are people who are promoting a vision of New Zealand that restricts women, restricts queer and other identities and their engagement with social and public life, is racist, and in large part is trying to impose a version of a kind of past that never really existed. And I'm not accusing Chantelle of personally doing that, I'm just talking about the general themes of the kind of language that we're seeing in the places that we study. Yeah, so it is about personal choices and that personal sense of risk. I guess one of the things that we talk about in the study of movements is that, as you would have seen by people who've decided to turn up to ask me questions about how I've defamed them, is that we've seen what we call a high level of availability, biographical availability, from that movement to participate and be actively involved. And so therefore, if we care about other things, we need to perhaps have equal amounts of biographical availability. Obviously, biographical availability does increase for people when they feel like their livelihoods, etc., are under threat. So, you know, I can see why there is increased biographical availability for people who have lost their jobs through mandates, etc., because, you know, they do have an imminent sense of threat, of fiscal threat. But converting that into targeting individuals because of their identity is something that is not how we have negotiated difference in the past in New Zealand, and so that's kind of the piece that we're trying to hold space for us to have civil and respectful conversations that don't, that enable us to negotiate that space. So yeah, thanks, but it's a great question, and it's one that I wrestle with every day. Young woman in the room.
My name is Rosie, and my question is, it seems important to present multiple views, but when presenting the side of the story, how would you ensure you get the weighting correct? As in, do you present the minority view as equal to a majority view, or is there a way that you can show two views in a light that means the majority is seen as a majority? Because it often seems the views, minority views get a lot of media time, whereas the majority is often silent.
Yeah, and I think that's part of my piece of talking about we need to articulate the values that kind of quietly not talked about it and perhaps subsided away. I come from genocide studies, which is another conversation and obviously in genocide studies it's really important to knock both sides, equally both sides, an argument, a Holocaust denying argument, and a narrative that talks about the reality of what happened with the Holocaust. In periods of uncertainty like we've just been through with COVID-19, it is much more difficult. And I think that as we reflect, and I'm a historian, as we reflect back on the past, there will be things that we need to uncover and examine about whether too much weighting was given to one particular narrative or another at different times during what was people trying to make decisions on the fly with the information they had in front of them, which is sadly how we have to make decisions in these circumstances. And I do think that on historical reflection it will be really important to appropriately evaluate the science communicators and the people who participated in every part of the COVID-19 response. I hope that there is a recognition of why these are appropriate things. It's just not appropriate to send Susie Wiles death threats and call her a fat pig on the daily because she's chosen to communicate with people. So that's what I'm talking about in many levels. Let's have the conversations that are important now and save it for history to reflect on how things might have been done better. We know that the government response without the lack of immediate rollout to Maori more quickly of the vaccine definitely impacted the ability of misinformation and disinformation misinformation produces, which is spreading this disinformation into Māori communities much more. And that is something that I will always regret. That's something that happened.
You have identified problems, including individuals spreading disinformation with each other, as well as organised disinformation campaigns and targeted threats from the people you identified. Have you identified any solutions to these problems? What would you recommend?
So I think a lot of what we're seeing shared in New Zealand is what we would classify as misinformation. I'm classifying as misinformation that somebody might have created it with a malicious intent, but it's being shared by people who genuinely believe it. And so they're not, they genuinely think they're sharing something that's helping other members of their community. They are sharing it around their social networks to increase people's ability to make good decisions. It's just unfortunately based in false or inaccurate information. And so, one of the things that we can do as individuals is sort of say, gosh, I have heard something different. This is where I've had my information from. I'm interested in where you've got your information from. Let's just have a little cordial that is respectful. That says, I've heard something different. And it does. The difficulty is that all of this does take time and effort. One of the reasons that Chantelle's channel is so popular is Chantelle is a very warm, kind person who speaks to people and listens to them. And so...
Would you be willing to have a conversation with me in a private space?
We're not here to have that now.
No, absolutely not. I mean, at a later
have a
date.
conversation about it now, but I'm just saying that that's one of the reasons that Chantelle's channel works so well, is because
I have no idea who either of you are.
It's alright. You can Google me later.
I would love to. I love that. Thank you. But so that interrelationship-based communication is the best way to go about it, and I think that's quite stressful for people sometimes because it does take commitment, effort, and you have to be committed to the long game. And I just keep saying to people, it's not last Christmas, it wasn't about last Christmas, it's about Christmas in 5 years' time. It's about us being able to be together and get together for Māori and share the things and figure out ways that we can live with the difference in ways that don't mitigate, that do mitigate the sense of like targeted against people's identities, like pitting people one group against another. And I don't want to oversimplify that because when people's genuine identities as trans or queer, their racialised identities, their gender identities are being challenged and told that they are wrong by some people in these communities. That is not on. We don't get to tell people that they don't get to be human. That's not on the table. But we do get to have respectful conversations as long as we're bringing our shared humanity to them. I'm probably not going to take a question from Chantelle's mate, to be perfectly honest.
He's a scientist.
So Simon.
Wow.
No, I think we'll go with we do that. Thank you, everyone.
Democracy in action.
Oh my god. Say hello. Chantelle. Say hello. What does the definition of misinformation mean? You said it 52 times.
You can go look it up if you want.
Oh, 52 times, you don't even know what it means.